Hello, and welcome back to my show, Fixing Us. This is the show where we focus on ways to fight problems that are on the front line of worsening the political climate in America. Today's episode is going to be focused on a deep-seated issue in the current political climate across the U.S. Polarization. Polarization is an issue that has caused the blatant great divide among us Americans. It stems from politicians, media illiteracy, media bias, social media figures, and more. It pulls us away from each other and causes us to attack one another without thinking. So, let's dive right in. First, we need some background on what polarization is. Why does it exist? Why is it a problem? What do we do about it if anything can be done? We're going to be looking at polarization and a type of polarization called affective polarization. When you hear the word polarize, you might think of sunglasses because they always say polarized lenses on them. Polarization is a term in physics that means to restrict the vibrations of a wave in one direction. Imagine several initial electromagnetic waves whose electric fields are oscillating in several directions, which is what natural sunlight does. It then passes through a vertically polarizing filter, which blocks out all oscillations other than those in a vertical direction. The resulting waves are those whose electric fields are oscillating vertically. In political science, you can think of the initial waves as a person who has varying political beliefs, social beliefs, and culture. Their filter would be their environment they develop around, ideas and cultures they interact with, and types of media they consume. It polarizes them as eventually they may find themselves aligning with a certain set of beliefs on one side of the political spectrum and less with outside ideas. Different lenses, or environments, cultures, ideas, etc., exist, resulting in people to be polarized in different ways and at different ends of the political spectrum. The metaphor between physical polarization and political polarization can get shaky if you get into depth, but we'll try not to think too hard about it. You can think of polarization more simply as the growing divide between ideology as political ideas move more towards the extremes on either end of the political spectrum. Now, what is affective polarization? Plainly, affective polarization is the growing distrust, dislike, and fighting towards outgroups of polarized groups. It's a process that is and has been happening in America for decades. Affective polarization is facilitated in a variety of ways, which I will go over soon. Why is affective polarization a problem? To explain this, I'm going to look at a podcast interview with a political scientist, Dr. Liliana Mason, who wrote a book titled Uncivil Agreement that heavily addresses affective polarization. In this episode, she describes how affective polarization has created an issue resulting in people garnering true emotional hostility towards outgroups or people who have different political beliefs. Affective polarization makes political belief less of a policy versus policy disagreement and into a my beliefs, culture, and ideology versus yours. She explains how people will change their political beliefs based on what they're being told, causing people to follow parties blindly and with too much loyalty. She even talks about a study where members of a certain group felt empathy towards in-group member suffering and pleasure towards out-group member suffering. She also talks about a study that shows how when members of an in-group's ideology are attacked, the same part of the brain that typically responds to physical attacks lights up. Meaning people whose political beliefs are getting attacked feel as if they're physically being attacked. It is incredibly dangerous when people blindly follow ideas, find pleasure in outgroup suffering, and have such a deep emotional connection to their ideology that it becomes physical for it to be attacked, because those people will be far less willing to split from their ideas, even harmful or hateful ones. We know what affective polarization is and why it is harmful, but how does it happen? Affective polarization happens through various factors including social media, political figures, media figures, news sources, environmental issues, societal issues, educational institutions, and culture. Those are just the surface of what causes affective polarization. I want to focus on social media, news, and political figures. How does social media contribute to affective polarization? Dr. Liliana Mason talks about how media companies are essentially incentivized to polarize the population. Social media like TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram benefit from engagement. People who are polarized want to see their side winning and the other side losing, as the study Dr. Mason references earlier shows. Social media algorithms know this and show people who consume media from one type of political ideology content of their side doing well and content of opposing sides doing poorly. This causes likes and views, which make the social media company more money. A side effect of this engagement is that the content itself will grow the viewer's distrust and dislike towards the other side. As the person who interviewed Dr. Mason, David McRaney, explained it, it's like 3 feedback loops causing a perfect storm of feedback. As for news, it's the same kind of picture. News outlets profit from engagement and viewership. If they show who is winning and who is losing, as Dr. Mason explains, they make more money and profit through increased engagement. This also causes the same positive feedback loop. Finally, political figures contribute to affective polarization. Dr. Mason also goes over this, explaining how politicians often use terms like we and they, or us and them, building an identity with a group versus merely a political idea. I'd argue politicians also have a similar incentive as media companies do, and news companies. Except not only do they get money for spreading divide, but they also gain power, and power is arguably more dangerous than money. Alright, we see that affective polarization is a thing, why it happens, and why it is bad for America. What are we going to do about it? This is where I'd like to put on my favorite section of the podcast, book review. For new listeners, book review is a segment of my podcast where I go over a piece of literature relevant to the topic. We'll do a bit of analysis and see where it takes us. Today's piece is Parker Palmer's Healing the Heart of Democracy. In this book, Palmer goes over how we fix American democracy. One of his main ideas is that American democracy is suffering from a crisis of the heart rather from institutions. The problems arise from how individuals interact with other individuals who have other beliefs. Another big idea he has is that positive tension, or eustress as psychologists term it, is essential for a thriving democracy. In the beginning of his book, he describes a prairie his friend had helped restore, containing over 100 species of flowers and insects. Palmer's friend described how strong this prairie is now due to the extent of diversity it holds. Palmer says the prairie is a metaphor for democracy. A strong democracy is diverse, and each member of it learns to respect one another and the fact that they are all different from one another. He ties this into the idea of maintaining stress and tension in a democracy. In a diverse democracy, stress exists as people are asked constantly to challenge their preconceptions and their patience. This sounds like a bad thing, but Palmer and psychologists argue that a type of stress that results in growth is a beneficial type of stress called eustress. Palmer argues that in our democracy, people flee this idea of diversity. It creates a quote-unquote relief of tension, which might sound good, but it contradicts the necessity of eustress Palmer emphasizes. The rest of his work goes over solutions of how to create this eustress and learn how to respect each other. In a part of his book labeled Diversity, Tension, and Democracy, he lists several points of how tension of our differences creates a healthier democracy, such as listening to each other openly, having empathy for the other, and creating deep, nuanced discussion among each other. And other in this case means people who are not like you. His argument overall is strong. It follows sound logic, and it is seemingly a great solution to healing our democracy, backed by tons of reasoning. However, the weaknesses stem from a lack of empirical evidence, and this world he talks about is very idealized. Try getting most of the population to read this book and put these ideas into practice. That would be difficult, and it would be especially difficult to do in highly impoverished areas, where education may not be as good. He makes a strong argument, but needs a better vessel to practice them with more data to back his claim. So, how could we realistically implement Palmer's ideas to a solution? Like I said before, he needs a better vessel to spread these ideas. This is where my idea for a nonprofit idea comes in. Before introducing my nonprofit, you should know a few more definitions and concepts. In a pamphlet titled Habits of Heart and Mind, the authors detail how we can fortify this thing called civic culture. Civic culture is defined as the set of norms, values, narratives, habits, and rituals that shape how we live together and govern ourselves in our diverse democratic society. In short, it's the collection of all actions everyday Americans make. We can have a healthy civic culture or an unhealthy one. A healthy civic culture is, in essence, what Palmer describes America needing to strengthen its democracy. Healthy civic culture also lessens affective polarization by promoting love, respect, and seeing those who have differing beliefs as fellow Americans rather than enemies or quote unquote them. An unhealthy civic culture would be like the one we live in now. People treating fellow Americans as other or different, verbally or physically fighting those who align differently politically, and being overall disrespectful to American democracy. This is what increases affective polarization. Moving back to my nonprofit idea, I want to focus on one of the methods that Habits of Heart and Mind tells for how we can fortify our civic culture. That is, engage people in co-design and decision making. Co-design is defined as an approach to problem solving that involves people in decision making processes. How is my nonprofit going to do this? By teaching. I want to set up a nonprofit institution called Fixing Us Institute, or FUSI, that will host classes either in person or online that uses the Socratic style of teaching. Its primary goal is to teach students how to think critically, work together, and implement those skills into stopping political polarization in America. The classes will include political science with an emphasis in contemporary American politics, sociology with a focus on political divide and polarization, and a logic and reasoning class with a focus on Boolean logic, fallacies, and how they're used in politics. How do these classes capture the healing method of engaging people in co-design and decision-making? The Socratic teaching style creates a sense of shared knowledge and questioning one another, critical for decision-making. The topics taught all deal with polarization in some form and teach critical thinking skills necessary for decision-making. Classes will include final projects that require the class to join and come up with some way to implement what they've learned throughout the class into the public space to help spread awareness or reduce the effects of affective polarization. They will have to elect a project overseer for these as well, someone who has proven they know the material and they have a plan. Classes will be an hour long, run for maybe a month shorter than a typical academic semester or just as long, and be hosted in rented venues or online spaces taught by a volunteer teacher or professor. This organization will be more effective than just telling people to be nicer. It gets a group involved in decision-making processes and leaves them with long-lasting knowledge about a serious issue in American democracy. I leave asking you to consider how you may be affected by polarization and what you can do in your life to minimize it. Thank you for listening.